So, what I wanted to talk about was the topic that was brought up last Sunday. I talked about generational trauma. And I have many videos on this account, uh, over 100, and the ones that seem to garner the most views and the most likes and the most comments and the most interest is the generational trauma videos that I do. And what I feel makes it a little bit different for me is I do have a strong, I feel, spiritual background. I was raised Catholic, I was raised Christian. I don't claim to be Christian now, but all of that teaching is still with me. And so I have several videos on here in which I explain how I was able to relate generational trauma to some passages in the Bible, particularly the passage sins of the father and stuff. So yeah, I just had a friend tell me that she was talking to her son about generational trauma. And without seeing my videos, the young man said, "Oh, sins of the father." So it's a pretty well-known term, and that you can relate to generational trauma. And it's from the Bible. The exact line is, "Sins of the father will be visited upon their children." And that is in there like twice. Later on, it does talk about sins of the fathers no longer visited upon their children, but I'm sticking to the one that's in the Gospels. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about a little bit about the generational trauma is it's on a spectrum, you know. That's want to explain that. So just saying the words generational trauma doesn't mean all of a sudden you're not functional in society and you're too emotional and you have too many impulses and you're just not able to hold down a job. So as a spiritual life coach dealing with addiction and behavioral health issues, I work a lot with parents in which they're dealing with addiction and mental health issues either in their homes or in their families. And I'll be honest, what I see, obviously is the generational trauma happening that's gone all the way through to their adult child. So I guess I feel the need to review generational trauma really quick, even though I've done it several times already in other videos. Generational trauma states that whatever traumas that a person receives as a child, mostly, that are unresolved. So when I say there are traumas that are unresolved, the body went through some kind of traumatic experience in which physiologically the body, in a way, you could say, was preparing for death. It was starting to get anxious. The whole feeling in the body is like, oh my gosh, this is it. So strong anxiety, strong panic, but that isn't allowed to complete the cycle. And it's stopped up, and lots of times it's pushed down. So you can imagine how many times this kind of thing may happen to a child, even to a parent who's doing their best to raise the child, just not realizing that they even may be going through a trauma from what they're experiencing. And if that child is already born with a mind, with a brain that's has an emotionally sensitive nervous system, it may go through a trauma. So anyway, child pushes it down, the cells multiply, their body grows up, and then it goes into their genetic material, and then they are now at higher risk for having children that have mental health diagnoses with emotional dysregulation conditions like autism, ADHD, bipolar, schizophrenia, PTSD. So I am autistic, ADHD, PTSD, right? And so that's generational trauma in a nutshell. But just because that happens, it doesn't mean you're not necessarily non-functional. Because what I was saying was the parents of the people that I coach, I can see had generational trauma. They are inheritors of generational trauma. Sometimes they know that they are ADHD, or they know that, or they tell me they have been treated for severe anxiety, right? So that tells me that generational trauma is also in them too. The difference between them and their child, though, is they are born with what I call resilience to adversity. They are able to function through all of their intense emotions when they get triggered, where their adult child isn't able to function as well. They do not have this resilience to adversity. So lots of times, so what I'm talking about generally with the generational trauma are those on the farther end of the spectrum, where the generational trauma has maybe gone through two, maybe three generations of being pushed down. Each generation before them is functional. They're able to hold a job. They're able to pay a mortgage. They're able to maintain their families. But then it gets passed down, and then it finally ends up in a person who's now so full of backed up, unresolved trauma energy that's not even theirs, is now born with such severe mental health diagnoses that have emotional dysregulation as a feature and very little resilience to adversity, very little impulse behavior control, and strong emotional dysregulation. And so in society, they might be considered, and I don't like this term, it's just a term you may recognize, they might be considered failure to launch, right? And so, uh, they have a hard time maintaining consistent income. They're in and out of jobs. They're either regularly unemployed or underemployed. It's harder for them to maintain their marriages. It's harder for them to maintain friendships and family relationships. Lots of times they have severe depression and anxiety. Lots of times they have multiple addictions. Okay, so this was me, I'll be honest. Okay, and that's why I went on a strong spiritual path in all of my work to resolve all of this for myself. Right. So I'm really talking about people who have a really hard time functioning consistently in society, meaning they can contribute consistently to the economic-based society that we live in and maintain regular income and jobs without getting fired or quitting all the time. And, and they are unable to, maintain family relationships as well. So this is really what I'm talking about over here, the people on this end of the spectrum. So like I said, you can have generational trauma and be an inheritor of generational trauma and be functional. I'm talking about the people that really aren't stuff. And so in the Bible, it says sins of the father will be visited upon their children. And so I feel that what the Bible was talking about, or at least you can make an inference to it. I'm not saying that I am a biblical expert and I know exactly what the author of the Bible was talking about when they wrote that line, but you can infer in there sins of the father. So the ancient Greek word for sin means missing the point. It never necessarily meant you did anything wrong. It just meant you were missing the point, meaning you didn't know what you were supposed to do with your feelings. You didn't know what you were supposed to do if you were traumatized, and you pushed it down. You misunderstood. You were missing the point. You're missing the target is really what it's from. So the ancient Greek word for missing the target, missing the point, misunderstanding is sin. So because our forefathers misunderstood what they were supposed to do with their feelings, which is basically just feel them, to resolve them, to complete the cycle, it got passed. Gets passed down, sort of like the national debt. And then finally, human biology or the universe says somebody has to pay for this. And it ends up in a person like us. And so what I'm trying to say is also that, so when people like us, we have a hard time fitting in, you could say, more than the average. Okay, so my story was that I was fitting in to a certain degree, but mainly because I was married to such a functional person who's so functionally efficient and caring that I didn't even know that I was autistic and ADHD and that emotionally dysregulated and had this strong executive functioning problems because she was doing everything until I got divorced and she left. And then I found out just how emotionally dysregulated and strong executive functioning issues that I had. And I realized I'm not as functional as I thought I was at the age of 50. Okay, so this is the kind of person that I'm talking about. People that just have a hard time functioning in there. So I myself got really despondent and depressed. And I strongly feel, I should say this, I see that people are starting to make comments in here and ask questions in here. of which I am totally open to discussing things as I talk before I do the meditation, as I talk about this topic and all. And so somebody wrote down there, what happens to, if you can clarify that, Champagne PA, if you can clarify what you're talking about there, and I'm totally willing to discuss things as long as I feel I can discuss it and relate it to the topic. So if I can't relate it to the topic, or I don't feel it's necessarily on point, or I don't understand, I'm not going to be able to address it. So if you want to rewrite that in a way in which I can sort of understand it, I apologize, Champagne PA. Okay. And so I feel sometimes we have to find a sense of meaning and purpose in a different kind of way, because I was finding meaning and purpose in our society through the ways that people normally do, through a career that's meaningful, through a family that's meaningful. Because of the severe, in my opinion, emotional and mental health issues that I feel strongly, it wasn't the only thing, but it strongly contributed to the end of my marriage. I lost both things that gave me a sense of meaning. And one of the main things was my family. And so I was very depressed and despondent. And the story is honestly that I was meditating or praying on it and even asking God, why did you even create somebody like me? Because I was so depressed and I did not see how my mental health was just a lifetime of managing these things. And I've seen this in others. I've seen other people who I feel are also inheritors of generational trauma. They have multiple mental health issues, addiction issues ongoing throughout their lives, sort of like me. And the best they could do is manage it. And they're never quite able to hold down a full-time job. Lots of times they do need help. And so I was praying to God, why did you create somebody like me? I don't understand. And this is exactly how it happened. A thought came into my consciousness, whispered into my ear that said, sins of the father. And immediately, because of my work as a drug counselor, I related it to generational trauma. I wasn't planning to think that. I wasn't planning to answer that to myself. Like I said, I was praying and meditating, saying, why did you create somebody like me? And that was the answer that came out. And I immediately related it to generational trauma. And so that gave me a renewed sense of purpose and meaning. And I realized and decided throughout the work that I did afterwards as a life coach, working with families dealing with addiction, mental health, and behavioral health issues in their homes, to give myself new meaning there. And my work totally changed. And throughout the last few years, over time, through certain spiritual shifts, of which the meditations are based on, um, I feel that if you were to ask me, what do you want now with your life, Mike? What do you want now? Actually, yeah, somebody just asked me that today. Now that your daughter has gone to college and you moved her into her dorm and all, what do you want to do with your life now? And what I said to that person is, what I want is whatever God intends for me. That's what I want. And I'm serious. In this hour, in this week, in this life, what I want is for my intentions and for the universe's intentions or God's intentions to be aligned as much as I can at all times. And so that means resolving a lot of the unresolved emotions of the ego, which is constantly trying to grab things or push away things that it likes or doesn't like, and it gets in the way of sometimes knowing intuitively what God intends for you. If your ego's in the way, grabbing things and wanting things, like a lot of money, or not that there's anything wrong with this, but the way my ego does it, it does it in a very desperate, anxious, smash and grab kind of way because of the mental health. And so I really had to resolve that. But what I want is whatever God wants for me. And so I thought about that, to have basically on a regular basis put my will to the side and put God's will first, to always be doing God's will, the universe's will. I'm not trying to say that I'm religious or Christian. I can use the universe, I can use source energy, I can use God, I can use universal energy. It doesn't matter. But the point is to be in alignment with that, to be in flow with that. And I feel in order to do that, you really have to give up things that the ego, I mean, when you say give up your will to God's will, which is a 12-step thing as well. I was in 12-step program. Step 3, give your will over to your higher power. So your higher power is totally controlling, it's your higher power's will. And so what that means is like a really good uh, story in the Bible that shows this is when Jesus was, before he did his uh, sermonizing and going around and preaching and all, the story was he went to the desert for 40 days and 40 nights and fasted and prayed and prepared himself for all the preaching or talking that he was going to do about what, and the story was that he was tempted by the devil. Now, I'm not going to say in the Bible, my interpretation of it, that there was a guy there, the devil, stuff like that. I'm not going to go into that part of it. I'm looking at it symbolically. And so the story was that the devil tempted Jesus in 3 ways. The first way was simply survival because Jesus was fasting out there for 40 days. And the devil said, have some bread. And Jesus said, no. And so when you give up your will to God's will, I mean, you even give up to God, do I want to live and survive to a ripe old age? That's up to God. You give that up to God. Survival. Do you want some bread? No. The second temptation of the devil was, there was 3 temptations. The second temptation was end your suffering. And the devil told Jesus, jump over the cliff there and have God's angels catch you. And Jesus said, no. And to me, symbolically, that meant end your I will help you to end your suffering. So these are things that what person wouldn't want this, to live till a ripe old age, to live and survive like that, to end your suffering, you know. Um, that was the second one. And then the third one was the devil showed him an abundant life. I'm pretty sure he showed him what, from Jesus's point of view, was maybe a quote unquote normal life. They said they showed him like a kingdom with riches and stuff like that, but I'm sure he also showed him a wife, kids. Why don't you have a normal life? Don't do this. Don't do this sermonizing you're going to do, and I'll give you just a normal life. I'll give you an abundant normal life with a wife and kids and riches and wealth. And Jesus said, no. And so I'm not trying to say you are required to give this stuff up, but when you give your will over, things like survival, not up to you, it's up to God. Things like ending your suffering and not ever suffering anymore. We don't know what's going to be in our path. Death of loved ones, life-changing medical issue. We don't know what's going to happen. A divorce. We don't know what's going to happen. We're not really in control of the suffering part of it. What we're going to go through in our roller coaster of up and downs that life has intended for us. And so ending your suffering. And then the last one is, if God wills it that you don't quite live that quote unquote normal life, then, step 3 of the 12 steps, you give your life, your will over totally. And so when I say, what do you want, Mike? I want whatever God intends for me. I had to think about that because that's the story that came to my mind when I was meditating on this. What do I want? I want whatever God intends for me. And immediately the story of Jesus being tempted in the desert by the devil while he was fasting out there for 40 days and 40 nights came up. And those were the 3 temptations. And I realized, yeah, these are the things when you give your will up, that's what it means. That means like possibly, not all the time, obviously, possibly something like that. But you give it totally. However, in my own spiritual journey, I feel here I was given the gift of God showing me the nature of itself. And therefore, when it was seen, everything was this. Everything is the energy of God or the universe. When I coach people, sometimes I like to call it the presence of universal energy. Some people like me to call it God energy or God. It's the same thing to me. And so I went through 11 years ago. Uh, I guess what if you ever go on a spiritual awakening journey and do a lot of meditation and look at non-duality videos, I went through what they would call a spiritual experience in which the nature of God revealed itself to me, being all of this. And I remember the feeling of it was this intense bliss came over me. It wasn't just peace, it was a bliss. And to the point where I had to ask myself if I had been drinking, because it felt like the way you would feel if you had taken a drug. It was that intense. And what kept coming from that bliss were the words, I am, I am, as in I am everywhere, I am in everything, and I am in everyone. I am. This is all me. I am this. And that intense, blissful I am energy was felt strongly from every waking moment, from the time I got up to the time I went to bed for 6 months straight, 11 years ago. The bliss went down, but the knowing of what the nature of God was never left me. And so for me, that's one of the reasons I don't necessarily follow any particular book, because knowing the nature of God or what this reality is doesn't involve words, doesn't involve an intellectual understanding. You know, if somebody got rid of your Bible, if someone never wrote any kind of books about this, or you lost the ability to understand words, or lost the ability to think about this or analyze this, how would you know that God exists if you can't think about it? You can't even say, well, look at all of nature, that those are words. If you had no ability to use labels and words and concepts anymore, would you know the existence of God or not? Without the books, without the words, without the intellectualizing, the analyzing, the concepts, the labels. So again, you can't say like, well, all of creation, I see the stars. Those are words. Everything is energy. Those are words. And so that's what I feel I was blessed with, was the knowing of the nature of the universe, God, on its own, without needing a book, without needing any kind of words. And it was just very clear. And the other thing that confirmed it for me was many, many others had these kinds of experiences. And so when I would talk to them or listen to YouTube videos, this was very common when you go on this spiritual awakening path to have experiences like this and stuff. So that's why in the meditation. So when I was going through this spiritual path, I did realize it was having a therapeutic effect on my mental health. And so I began to use it in my coaching. And so I'd say in a way, the kind of brand of coaching that I do is like the non-duality awakening path, but done in a coaching protocol in a therapeutic way. You know, my goal is to help people with their blocked emotions and help them to reduce the controlling, anxious, neurotic, intense, angry, scared side of their ego, to help them like reduce the size of their ego. Sometimes people report from doing the work with me, they have almost a full ego death. But I want to help people with their emotions that give them problems in their lives. Um, I'm not here to help people to spiritually awaken. I just noticed that on my path, it began to have certain effects on my emotional health, and that's how I help people now. Okay. And so what I wanted to do, so that was the topic discussion part. What I wanted to do with the meditation part was a certain kind of meditation. Like I said, what was shown here was God is, to me, not some person looking like Charlton Heston from the Ten Commandments up in the clouds looking down who's separate than me. God is everything, everywhere, and everyone. Everyone that I talk to who says they have an inkling of God, believe in God, they consider God or higher power to be real, they do feel that, yes, God is everything, everywhere, and everyone. And so this meditation plans to show you that what are we saying here is that there are no real individuals. There is only the will of God. There is only what is happening in the universe. There is only this reality of the energy of the universe. And some people have called it God. So therefore, there is only the will of God. And so when people say, well, what about the free will of individuals? If you ever listen to authors like Sam Harris, they try to prove in so many ways that there is no free will, that there is only this. And the way I see it is, it's not that there's no free will. There are no separate individuals outside of God to have free will. So there's no free will because there's no individuals. There's only the will of the universe. There's only the will of God. And once that was seen here in this life, that everything that I thought I was doing out of free will was really the universe controlling this story, even even the abusive parts of my childhood, even the parts where that were traumatic, like my divorce or my addictions, was all working towards being able to help people the way that I help them now. And so all the parts that somebody would deem bad and unwanted and suffering, it was seen that it all was very strongly contributing to my spiritual journey and how I help people now. And once I saw that, it was like game over. I was like, you know what? Everything was always the will of the universe or God, even when I thought it was my own, because I don't really exist as a separate individual. And so there's a feeling of a separate individual in every body. So there's a physical body here, and there's the feeling that you're a separate individual in here. You feel like you're in here and that you're separate. But I'm going to do my best to show you that it's just a feeling, that it's just a semblance of a separate person. It's just a semblance of a person, of an individual. Okay. It is not irrefutable proof that there is a separate individual that exists or separate person that exists in a body. Okay, so that's what this meditation is about. And that can maybe help you to know that in the end, when people ask, how do I know if my will is aligned with God's will or the universe's will? It always is. Because there is only the will of the universe. There are no separate individuals. And so, but when you're able to resolve the energy of the ego, aligning your life, aligning one's life with the will of the universe just goes more peaceful. It's smoother. People tell me that it just flows easier. They feel lighter. They feel less worried and less anxious or upset when they resolve the emotions, the unresolved emotions of the ego. And so that's the kind of work that I do. In the end, you are always there's nothing outside of the will of the universe because that's all there is. So even if when it looks like it isn't, it is. Okay, but this is designed to help you to just be more in alignment with it peacefully, more smoothly. So all we're going to do is we're going to, is the universe or God sentient? I'm really not strong with vocabulary, so I don't know what the word sentient, what is the definition of sentient? Can somebody type that in there? I'm doing my best to address people who type things in here. I'm looking it up on my computer right now. Is the universe sentient? Well, let's just try this out. let's just try to do the meditation and then you tell me. And again, this is with the understanding that even the word sentient and universe is a word, it's a label, it's a concept. In the end, we really do not know what any of this is, do we? You don't. Even if you said, well, everything is energy, well, that's just another label or concept. We do not know what this is. Some call it, it's the unknown. It is the great unknown. A lot of times what a spiritual awakening journey is being comfortable with the unknown, with the unpredictable, because that's what all of this is. I can tell you what all of this is, but all I'm going to tell you is a bunch of words, concepts, and labels from some book or something like that. It's just going to be another story. And it's going to go against somebody else's story. This is why I don't really like to argue semantics on this account, because it's just words, stories, and someone's going to come up with a totally different story. I mean, this is why, but I totally understand why, I'm not trying to say they're bad, stories or labels and concepts are bad, but in the end, we really don't know what any of this is. And so I'm just going to do my best to point to this kind of experience, and it's up to you for you to interpret yourself. I'll do my best to guide you based on what I feel it is, I guess. But it's, again, it's a personal thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to relax the body. Well, if the universe is operating through you, doesn't know it's alive and form its own experiences. If the universe is you and operating through you, and you know that it's alive, and you know that you're alive and you form your own experiences, then it is alive and forms its own experiences, at least when it comes through the form of a human being and a person. And of course, it comes through like all sorts of other living experiences: a tree, a squirrel, an ant, amoeba. Actually, everything is this. Everything is this living energy. Because when you take a powerful enough microscope and zoom into any object, whether it's quote unquote living or dead, you will see the same energy. You will see the same building blocks of the universe: energy, space, and matter, which can neither be created or destroyed and has many forms. So there is only one living thing in the universe, and that is the energy of the universe itself. And that's what was seen here for those 6 months, 11 years ago, that everything was screaming, I am. And in the Bible, I am is the first name of God. From the Old Testament, Yahweh meant I am. And that's what was screaming to me when everything was screaming. A car, a rock, a bottle on the road, a plastic bottle on the road was screaming, I am this. And so one could say, yes, one could say that. But remember, again, we don't know what any of this is. Okay, so we're going to relax the body. I'm going to do my best to point to the peaceful presence of universal energy, the living peaceful presence of universal energy. Understand that when I point to that, it's only one aspect of it. Universal energy also appears as, the power cord in my microphone. We're just looking at one aspect of it, the presence of the energy itself. And then from there, do my best to show you what the nature of the individual is. Okay? So first, now that I understand that sentient is the capacity to have subjective experience or awareness, if universal energy or God is appearing through a human being, then yes, because human beings have subjective experience or awareness. The difference is when you do this work, it is seen that what you thought your consciousness was just inside this skull or just inside this body is really everywhere. It's actually not just in here. It's only the belief that I am only alive inside this body, that my life force is only in this body. It's just that belief that makes it feel that way. But when the ego starts to dissolve and die, that sense of who you are is no longer just in the body. It is everywhere.